Well, at a time when coordinated global action is needed to stage a recovery, there are signs in the US and other leading economies that new forms of protectionism are emerging from government stimulus packages. To look at the impact of this on the global recession and the importance of trade and cooperation, I'm joined by Professor Robert Lawrence from Harvard University. Good morning, Professor Lawrence. Welcome to Business
Good morning.
Today.
Good morning.
Now, just take us through why global trade is so important in helping to lift the world economy out of the downturn.
Well, basically what we've seen is that trade has been the weakest part of the global economy. As people cut back on their demands, it reverberated through the system, and we saw slumping exports for almost every country in the world. We saw industrial output declining. And so if we're going to reverse that, the engine, again, is going to have to be trade. So I think trade is going to be a kind of a leading indicator of the health of the global economy.
All right. Now, looking around the region, we've seen a stabilization in Asian exports recently, but demand from Europe and the US still remains low. So what problems can that create?
Well, I think that really is going to be a change for the global economy. Consumers have seen in the US and in Europe have basically experienced a tremendous decline in wealth. With falling housing values and with equity markets depressed, consumers now have to build up their savings. So the consumption that was driving the world economy, basically coming from Europe and the United States, has weakened considerably. Governments have stepped in with fiscal stimulus packages, but this hasn't replaced the demand that was there before. So countries in Asia who have been driven by export-led growth, particularly to Europe and to the United States, are experiencing dramatic slowdowns.
All right, Professor Lawrence, now you say that trade will be the engine for growth into the future. However, there are concerns that we're seeing a new form of protectionism arise from these stimulus packages, particularly in the United States and also in Europe. We also saw a downfall or quite a lot of dysfunction in the Doha round of WTO talks. So how confident are you that the world will come together and look at trade as a growth engine?
Well, you're right. There are troubling signs. In the United States, the stimulus package had provisions which were named as Buy America. But it is important to get into some of the details of that. There is some discrimination, particularly against some exports from developing countries, because they're not part of the government procurement agreement at the World Trade Organization. But I think it's important that we don't exaggerate the amount of protection that has occurred so far. It's present, it is a danger, but by and large I think markets remain pretty open. Likewise, the Doha round has taken a hiatus period, but because of political problems in India and in the United States. But I think recently we've seen a willingness to get back to the table. So I'm hopeful, in fact, that the Doha round will make a lot of progress over the next year. It is the best way that global leaders can show that they appreciate the importance of trade as an engine of global growth. And I think, in particular, President Obama is going to want to signal to the world that he is interested in participating in multilateral initiatives.
Professor Lawrence, I think you'd probably be a member of a very small group hoping for the Doha round to be reignited. I think Australia's Trade Minister Simon Crean would also be a member of that group. But it is quite difficult when, you know, there are critics that say that one of the issues that is so concerning about this protectionism is that there were no sunset clauses put on these provisions, and also that after President Obama made that announcement about the Buy US, he did try and backtrack on that. However, it seems that there's still not a lot of confidence in what he said.
Well, the president basically doesn't run trade policy in the United States. It's the Congress. And the legislation of Buy America basically also had provisions that said that the United States would not contravene any of its international agreements. And the U.S. is part of the government procurement agreement at the World Trade Organization, which actually inhibits most of the spending from being applied in a discriminatory fashion. So I'm not denying, and I think there is evidence that at the level of American states, there has been some discrimination against imported products. But all I'm saying is that by and large, I don't see that protectionism is the key driver of trade flows in the economy today. It's basically the patterns of demand that are going to dominate whether or not goods are sold in international markets.
All right, Professor Lawrence, let's move on to free trade deals, looking at the Asian region. How important are efforts to continue to expand free trade agreements among APEC members?
Well, I think they can play a role. I don't think they're a substitute for multilateral agreements, but I think both formal trade agreements, I think something like a free trade agreement between Australia and China is probably the most trade-creating kind of trade agreement that I could imagine. Now, it is very important that the agreement be a meaningful one, that it be binding, and that it be comprehensive. But nonetheless, I think it can play a big role from the standpoint of opening the Chinese market to agricultural products, and in fact the Australian market to labor-intensive products. Now, it's very difficult for both sides, and indeed for many Asian countries, to do this in a period when their economies have slowed down. So there are a lot of political obstacles to doing these deals, but nonetheless, I think they are keeping markets open is a key ingredient if we're going to see a global recovery.
All right. Unfortunately, Professor Robert Lawrence, that's all we have time for. We'll have to leave it there. Thank you.
You're welcome.